And we're back for another episode of Startup Hustle, a podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. If you want to start, own, or build a business, then you're in the right place. We bring you the real truth about what it's like to take something from concept to launch. From growth, innovation, experience, failing, or winning big, we've got you covered. So let's get down to business with another episode of Startup Hustle, brought to you by Fullscale.io.
And we are back for yet another episode of the Startup Hustle podcast. Today's episode of Startup Hustle is sponsored by Fullscale.io, helping you build a software team quickly and affordably. And Fullscale also makes sure that we can do this amazing podcast. So we love them a lot. So today we have with us a fantastic woman leader, and she does something that I find so fun. So we have with us Petra Kralickova, and she is with the National Museum of Toys and Miniatures. So she is a nonprofit leader, and she gets to hang around really, really cool stuff all day long, and she gets to do some pretty cool programs. So I wanted to talk to her about her experiences. Petra, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for having me. Such a pleasure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So of course, the first question that I'm going to ask you is kind of that general, tell us about you, tell us a little bit about the museum, tell us about your journey. How did you get here?
About me, about the museum, it's always interesting how the journey takes you and your milestones, whether they're personal or professional, kind of mark who you are. So I love that the museum, especially the Toy and Miniature Museum, has become my part of the journey where I am now, right now. I always allowed my journey to kind of evolve, but I held on to the steering wheel very carefully. Growing up in Czechoslovakia under communism, I was a very fortunate 15-year-old when the communism ended. And I remember specifically singing a song in English and thinking, I'm going to go to America. And I did. And I think that is how my journey have always been. I put something in my head and then I follow that dream. So it's been an amazing, if I have to kind of look back that way, because I have always worked and ended up working in creative environments. For that reason, I've worked with museums and galleries and was always able to kind of think of the next thing. What do I want to do next? So really starting as a curator at the Kennedy Museum of Art and a director of exhibitions at the College of Fine Arts art galleries allowed me to work with artists and galleries and professors and students and just creatives and a small academic community. And this was right after my master's degree. I knew nothing. I was directing something that the students many times looked much older than I did. And so it was a huge challenge. And I stayed there for 10 years directing the galleries. And then I picked up another job in 2008 as the curator of the Kennedy Museum of Art. And that led me again to start directing more challenging exhibitions and artists that I could bring in. And all along, I was also an artist. I said I got my MFA. And so I was a studio artist. But as I was directing and being more in the administration, I realized that part also was creative. I was now conducting exhibitions for others and conducting and learning together with artists and galleries and professional gallerists and artists like Mark Dion and Jim Dine. And so that really became my job, though I loved exhibiting my own work. I studied ceramics, and then I did installation, so large works across a room that you could enter. And I exhibited in New York in the Black and White Gallery in Brooklyn, but that all just continued going. And I said my final work was my son, who is now 10 years old. And when my belly was so big I couldn't bend over, I had to really move along. And so my next really milestone was I started looking to be a director of a museum, because I really enjoyed that orchestrating, the administration. Believe it or not, I find it very creative. And I applied, but what I was being asked was fundraising and raising money, and I became then a fundraiser for the National Czech and Slovak Museum, and I began to work with donors and immigrants and ambassadors and consul generals and delegations from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it was an amazing community and learning how to speak with people. And so after those couple of years of the museum, I was ready to try again if I'm ready. And so I applied for a couple of positions, and then Kansas City recruited me to be the next executive director for the National Toy and Miniature Museum. And everything else is history, right?
Yeah. Wow.
I
So
know. I put a lot
there,
of
that, I mean, you really only, you spoke for a few minutes, and there are just, I've been writing furiously, like, all of these questions that I want to ask you, because there are so many different avenues that I want to go down. So you're going to have to bear with me if I'm a little all over the place. But the first question that I want to ask you, I want to take you all the way back to the beginning of your story.
absolutely.
And I want to ask you, as an immigrant, someone who, lived under socialism in Czechoslovakia, how do you think having that kind of experience changed you, informed you, affected you?
Sure. I always say the story of just living very close to my grandparents, watching my grandfather, who just despised communism and went through an incredible, owning a business and being an entrepreneur, to not joining the party, and so becoming a sweeper at a factory because that's all you could do if you didn't join the party. Just how tenacious and deliberate and vocal he was about what he believed in. And still, there was the Radio Free Europe. I would go to downstairs to my grandparents, and there would be my grandpa, and I was frightened of him because he was so sinuous and so serious, and I was the younger kid of the two, and I was too loud, and I jumped too much, and I asked too many questions, and so I don't know, I was frightened of him because he could really just look at me, but he just sat there and cut an apple with his hands, and the knife, he was putting the apple in his mouth just with the knife, and holding an antenna of a radio to listen to the Radio Free Europe and just get that information at least a little bit, so he feels strong and empowered. And it was just a real visceral experience for me to be part of that as a kid, not knowing really much more.
Well, that is, what an example. That is absolutely just beautiful and inspiring. I love that story. So tell me this, you clearly, your grandparents and your grandfather, they had a huge impact on you. And I think the thing that stands out to me in the story you just told is the fact that he was so strong in standing up for his principles, even to his own detriment. And so, some of those more standard measures of success, those were out of reach for him because of choices that he made to be strong in his beliefs. And I anybody who does that, like, you really have to look up to them and kind of hope to emulate them. And so my question to you is, how do you stand up for your principles? And actually, it's a two-parter, because I want to hear what your principles are, but I want to hear how you stand up for your principles today.
Mm-hmm. I think that was part of it, what you've asked about my journey, and I kind of allow to let it evolve, but I'm always holding and almost controlling, if I may say that. And I'm not a controlling person, but I'm always thinking, what else I can learn. And I think this goes back to my grandfather. I'm such a student of life. I'm continually looking up. If I don't know something, I pick up the phone and call whoever knows better. If I don't know something, I Google it and I look and I study it. And so constantly studying is such a principle in my life. Communication is almost the most important part where I feel like leadership stems for me right now. Really learning how to communicate clearly. And I fail every day. I mean, let's be clear. But
Sure.
I'm always trying to, and I ask questions and I ask questions. And though that may be really annoying at times to people because, um, in a way, if you're asking questions, you might be questioning them or you might be questioning what they're doing. But I just really want to know what the problem is so I can find the best solution. So, really, kind of my other principle is, finding what the problem is and then passing it on to people that are closest to the problem. I feel like as a leader now, I really try not to solve the problem myself. I inspire staff to kind of do their best work, but then I build on that energy and I build on their skill, but then I stay out of the way. Once I understand the problem, you see where I'm constantly holding on to that steering
Yeah.
wheel? I want to understand the problem, and then I feel like we're on the same page. And so I have now kind of become almost probably more confusing to my staff than anything else because I don't direct. I rather I tell them how I'm thinking about things, what I'm thinking about, how I'm arriving to understanding, and I share this mumble of thoughts. And I say, so are we on the same page? And they're like, Petra. So it's really crucial for me to kind of talk, think, and share, being transparent how I am approaching the thinking and from which direction. And then I feel like that people can really understand why I'm making some decisions or why I'm arriving at those thoughts. So really kind of being transparent, learning how to communicate constantly and allowing people to solve the problem they're closest is really so important. And then of course being tenacious and nimble and resourceful comes from really my kind of humble upbringing, if you will, during communism.
Yeah. That's that's amazing. I really love your commitment to transparency and authenticity as a leader, because I think that sometimes that gets lost in people's leadership journeys. You're so focused on being the boss that you may some may lose sight of how to be a leader. And sometimes being a leader means, to your point, empowering others around you to do their best work. So I really love that. So I'm gonna go back again just a little bit. One of the things that as you were telling your story, I had several kind of wow reactions. If you could see my face right now, I was like, wow, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So you've done a lot of different kinds of things. You've been an artist, you've done administration for galleries and for museums at a lot of different levels. And I want to ask you, why museums? Why galleries? Like, why, you talked about your love of administration and how that's a creative process. And we're going to delve into that. I promise you. Because that was something else that I wrote down. I just thought that was really cool. But, as an artist, what satisfies you or brings you joy in what you do in your day to day?
Mm-hmm. You ask a couple of things there, kind of what brings me joy, and then you ask one more question right before that, kind of how that journey really brought me from being an artist and being why managing galleries. I suppose I think that was it, joy and galleries and museums. I think, like I said, I let it evolve. I was always interested in kind of um, hands on and creating, and I watched my grandpa would fix a fence and my father would go and unfix it and fix it differently, so you can see there's a bit of a dynamic there. So I love this, like, problem solving, how a fence could be fixed so many different ways with the same string. And so I just loved. I think I always kind of tried to be creative in that way. In high school, I went to high school that taught accounting and typing and shorthand, and so it was for girls to become secretaries, really.
Mhm.
And so that was
Those
that was
are still very useful transferable
I
skills,
know,
though.
I know. So it was, even though we no longer type on typewriters and do shorthand, but I felt like I started really learning how to work with my hands and just seeing how creative problems happens. And I really think artists, as creative as they are, they're problem solvers, and they're always looking how to do something differently, how to envision something in the material world. And so, when I kind of envisioned to come to America, and then that is where I started, and got that freedom to become an artist and study to be an artist. When I was still in the Czech Republic, I actually applied to study English and be an English teacher, and I wasn't accepted because my English wasn't good enough. I learned English in high school, so that's my first place where I learned English. Uh,
Mhm.
but I didn't pass the entrance exam. So I went to London and I started learning there. And I spent 6 months there to prove and to learn English. So I felt like the world has always told me what to do next in some way if I was deficient in some way. But I just, as an artist, I dealt with museums and I dealt with galleries. And I always felt it wasn't enough, that I wasn't. The gallery's floors weren't clean, or the hooks weren't installed, the lights weren't. I'm like, I can do better. And I think that pushed me to become an administrator and make the best experience possible for other artists. And I moved for love back to Athens, Ohio, where Ohio University, where I studied. But then I left for master's degree and moved back for love to be there. And there wasn't really a lot of opportunities as is, but there was an opening for a director of exhibitions, and I was gonna get that job, or that was it, and I did.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so I am gonna cut in here really quickly and just remind our audience that today's episode of Startup Hustle is sponsored by Full Scale, and that Full Scale can help you build a software team quickly and affordably. We love Full Scale and everything that they do to make this show possible, to help their clients, to help clients build teams that can help them succeed. So thank you, Full Scale. You guys rock. Just wanted to mention that really quickly. But so Petra, I'm gonna follow that thread just a little bit. You talk about, well, actually, I'm not going to follow that thread. I just changed my mind. Sometimes I do that. You're at my whim. Ha ha ha. So what I'm going to ask is, earlier you talked about how you're a problem solver and how artists are problem solvers. And one of the things that I love about artists is that often they have to be so entrepreneurial. And I don't know that people really acknowledge that. But if you are an artist or a performer, you have to hustle to sell yourself and to sell your work and to become successful commercially so that you can survive, so that you can eat, really. So I want to talk to you about that. Like, how do you feel like you apply the entrepreneurial lens to the work that you do?
Absolutely. I mean, I started as an artist, and so learning all those skills to have so many hats, like you said, you have to market yourself, you have to sell yourself, you have to have a brand, you have to actually have a product that's good and somebody will buy it. It has to be marketed in a way that people would either afford it or that you actually get paid. And so all of this, I felt like, all of these aspects of being an artist, and I really pushed it. I think I applied every day to everything. I was sending out packets. I had it down to the science. And of course, all the rejections letters were coming back, but I felt like I was always learning. And I think, again, the entrepreneurial spirit comes from, you do all of this work and you completely fail at like 90% of it, but it gives you so much information why you're failing. That
I'm laughing because I cannot tell you how much I agree with that, and I also cannot tell you how much people don't don't seem to know that.
I hated getting those letters, but I loved learning why they would say that they didn't like something. And of course, sometimes the letters were, just more of a just this is we
Well,
don't.
sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt, like, consider the
But
source.
then,
But
I tell you what,
sometimes
I went and I looked who got that position. I went and I looked who got that show. And I
yeah,
went and I looked whom they hired for the position I didn't get. And I scoured what they have and I didn't. And of course, it's all written. But there is so much information. And I think that's where, again, the kind of the tenacity comes in of just learning. And I just really wanted to know, why did I fail so I don't do it again? And I think, now being a nonprofit leader, there is board relations, HR, policies, and communication, and marketing, and social media, fundraising. And it feels like I have done all those things already. So it's really interesting. Even though I don't have a deep knowledge of all of them, I have enough knowledge to then rely on the people that are professionals, but I know how to fail. I feel like I have failed so many times that it doesn't bother me.
yeah. You're not as uncomfortable as the average
People
person might be.
Because I said I'm gonna go to England because I failed my entrance exams, and I did, and I got to go studies there. I'm gonna go to America and do something else there, and I followed love there, and I failed with that love, and it's just I think. You allow those failures to kind of inform you, and I think that's the entrepreneur spirit, that you just get up and keep going.
Yeah. Well, I love that, and I have to tell you, I truly admire you. And we've talked before, but we've never had like a really long, deep conversation, and so I'm learning so many little gems about you, and I'm
We
very
met at an
happy. I love
interesting
this.
time. We met at an interesting time where I was just getting here, 2017, 3 years ago.
Yeah,
And, COVID hit halfway through it. And so it's just been challenging in that way to really get to know people and get to kind of pursue, truly to be out on public.
yeah. Well, so now I'm going to give you the opportunity to brag a little bit,
Yeah.
and here it comes. So the museum.
Hmm.
I have to tell you, I went to the museum, I experienced the museum, and I don't think I expected to enjoy it as much. I expected to enjoy it,
Yeah.
but I don't think I expected to enjoy it as much as I did. You have led a team that has crafted and curated a really incredible collection of fun and beauty and like all of these just really incredible memories and history. And like, for instance, one of the things that was super stuck with me, the it's like an architecture model, like not a classroom, but like do you know what I'm talking about?
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, I mean, it was just this beautiful miniature. Is it like a diorama? Is that what it's called?
It's an architect's classroom, and it's a room.
Yeah.
It's a miniature scale interpretation of architect's classroom by
And I'm like, I
Petras
can picture it in my head, like crystal clear right now, because I was so struck by not just how beautiful it was, but how it was really just a slice of history, and the amount of care and detail that went into creating this classroom was just, it blew my mind. And so there were several exhibits like that, like through many actually throughout the museum, where like I'm being kind of taken on this journey, and some of these things are reminding me of my childhood, and some of these things are teaching me, and some of these things are things that are just kind of fun to look at, you know. And so it's just, the museum is an incredible experience, and so I want you to talk to us about the museum and kind of tell us, how do you feel about the museum and what do you love about it?
I was just blown away when I walked in during the interview, and just taken by the staff, of their how professional they were, of the museum, how professional it was, how lit it was, how clean, how presented. And you have to know, I stepped into the museum just post renovation. So the museum really has been there since 1982 and started at a 7,500 square foot museum at a mansion on the university campus of UMKC. And then we have since have done several remodels and additions, and now it's over 33,000 square foot museum of art and history, and the art being the fine scale miniatures. And I say fine scale because it is a scale that's considered 1 to 12, where fine scale miniature artists work at. And history, I mean toys, because it really brings the history of toys and our social history, why toys are made at the time that they were made and what they reflect, and how children played with them. So we need to kind of own, and what I am continuing is the legacy of our founders. So we had two amazing women, Barbara Marshall and Mary Harris Francis, as the founders of the museum. Barbara was a patron of the arts. She commissioned work. So that is why you find that so amazing, because it's one of a kind work. It's commissioned. And she commissioned some of those work. The artist's classroom made by Bill Robertson, who is actually a local artist and is regarded as one of the most inspiring and inspired miniature artists in the world, in Kansas City. And
Yeah.
they made this classroom, and it is so researched and so detailed, and everything works. The little toolbox, the little shades, the chairs spin down, and the
Yeah.
paint, everything works.
I think he actually spoke at TEDx
Yes, he did.
years back.
Yes, he did.
And watching the process that he used, because I mean, he's not only is he's actually a craftsman, just at a much smaller scale. But not only that, like, so not only do these things work, but he's like sourcing wood that is of the period and metals that are of the period. And I just remember being so struck by the absolute painstaking attention to detail and the work. Like everything that he's doing, you can have a craftsman make a chair and it's going to be a beautiful chair and it's going to work well, and that's great. But he's doing it at such a small level. Like he's wearing these little glasses and using these teeny tiny tools that he made himself. And like, it's just, it's a fascinating process to watch. I love it.
Yes. And so I was in arts, and I directed arts and full scale arts. And so learning now, again, you see that learning, I continue to learn. I love it. Learning about miniatures and miniature artists that create these miniature works of art. So I just want to stress that, we are an art museum that is just magical, and it's an art of imagination, really, if you will. And because Barbara was the patron of the arts, and because she commissioned work, my curators coined it as the Museum of Dreams. And I tell you why. It's because Barbara allowed, and she supported, and she pushed the artists to create something that was one of a kind, and it was something that they've always wanted to do, and then she allowed it. Where Mary Harris Francis loved stories behind toys. So many times she didn't want the brand new toy in a box. She wanted the toy that was played with, that was punched, that was torn, that was repaired, that was brushed, and know that story and tell the story. And I think that is why I walk through the museum sometimes. I walk out of my office and I hear, "Oh my God, I had that toy and remember we did this." And it is just so amazing. And when you walk downstairs in the miniature, you hear, "How is this made? That is impossible." I mean, what museum do you walk in that you hear these exclamations of joy? And it is amazing. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I had very much the same experience, and I need to go back, mostly so that we can hang, but also because I remember walking.
You can't see it all. If we were the full scale, we would be a huge museum, and so you just cannot see it all.
I remember like walking through, and I was fascinated by the miniatures, and I loved, like, you have a really impressive dollhouse collection. Like, that was super fun to look at. And I remember like walking by and I saw Teddy Ruxpin and I got all excited because
Yeah.
I was like, I remember playing with my Teddy Ruxpin when I was a little kid. And I love that you refer to it as the Museum of Dreams, because I can totally see that and appreciate that. And I think that everybody could probably use a little bit more of their childhood in their lives,
And
you know?
the way that the museum is really special is that you bring your aunt, you bring your uncle, you bring your grandparents, and you bring multiple generations, children. They will all have fun. Nobody will be sitting on the sidelines. Everybody will be engaged in these amazing conversations of memory and of history and of amazement and magic. How is this possible? And you envision everybody huddling and showing, look at that tiny little detail. That is just so incredible. So we do hear that people bring their in-laws into our museum when they visit, because it's one of a kind museum. You can't see it anywhere else.
Yeah, it really is a Kansas City treasure, and I would highly recommend, like, anybody in the Kansas City area definitely go. It's just a really fun, fun experience, I would say,
Well,
but
and
really
Lauren,
this
it just
sense of wonder.
combines
If
the
you're not in the Kansas City area, come for a visit. We have good barbecue here.
I know. And it really, what I loved, I think, most of all, because I start, I'm a traveler, and I'm a reader, and I cook, and I love being in nature, but the collection encompasses objects from history, architecture, decorative arts, material culture, science, mathematics, theater set design. It's just, I loved how you can talk about everything through all of those objects. And it just really, just coming from an art perspective was so interesting, but that you can have these objects that speak to so many fields was really impressive.
Yeah. Well, I love that. So I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. So here it comes.
Uh-oh.
So talk to us about the experience of running this museum. And one of the things that I want to hear about, going back to that problem solver lens that you apply to things, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced as a curator and a director and a leader for such an institution?
So I was tasked to make the museum visible, both local and national, on a both local and national level, to diversify income and grow programs in order to kind of bring a broad audience and partnerships. So I came in with a very specific strategic plan that wanted to accomplish something, and I felt it was great because I know what to do, but it really has taken me a while to figure out how I do it in my own way. And so looking back now, it took selecting a team. And so that was challenging because I couldn't jump to do those things. I had to do hiring, and I had to do interviewing, and I had to place the right people in the right place, and then align the team in a way that we're going the right way. Get used to each other. Me asking all these questions, and what does really the new director want? And it's I think it was just, I arrived to a museum that was amazing, amazingly organized. It was stable, financially and organizationally. And how do you create a change in something that's so perfect? So you have to almost break it again. And I feel
Right.
I have almost broken it just so I can kind of create a space. And I think that was most challenging because it took me a while to really figure out how I can make that difference, how I going to make those goals a reality. What is going to be my kind of journey. How are we going to do it? And then why, and then having to say, why are we doing this? And, it allowed me to really kind of say, I'm focusing on the museum. And especially now, of course, it changed midway through that goal. I was ready with initiatives and all kinds of things. And then COVID hit. So I had to scramble all over again. And now, we're becoming in a more focus of how to be resilient, how to be impactful, how to be sustainable. In a way, I now have like a second goal, even though I'm still working on the first one that I was handed. But right now, with COVID, it just became like a whole new bag of worm, because I thought, oh man, that's not why I was here to do that. But somebody told me, I have such smart board members. They tell me, you know what? Your success will be how you lead through COVID, and that will be your legacy. And I'm like, okay. And that pushed me, like, you know what? All the other initiatives we had to pause and cancel and stop. That was okay, because that was again my next direction, and I loved it because I can still pick that up. But creating how we get through this and understanding that is my purpose, I was able to do it. So both challenges, you can see I had to kind of switch gears as everybody else did. But I think that was my grappling as well.
Yeah. Well, and there are very few leaders that I know that would be so uniquely qualified to lead your organization through such a difficult time. So way to go on that. But I guess I want to turn our eyes to the future a little bit. I think that, COVID has deeply impacted our society across so many different levels. And, but I think that we are reaching a point where we're getting through it, and we're finding ways to innovate and, dare I say, pivot, to come together and deal with this. So what I would like to talk to you about right now is what are your hopes for the future? What do you see, or what are you most excited about, for the museum?
I think COVID didn't just change the direction of kind of how to be resilient and impactful and sustainable. That was always there, but it became kind of the high peak. But I think COVID wasn't the only if you will, tragedy or activity that's happening right now. It's also how we become a civic leadership organization that has the civic knowledge and mindset and skill to kind of have conversations that are current. And so, we are now also looking at our museum to be more diverse, and it's kind of pushed through how to include diversity and inclusion and equity, and those are of course all the really important words, and that they are in everything that we do. And they weren't there at the very beginning when I got there. They were there, but not on the front of the like the windshield. I always compare it, I'm driving a car. But it is so important to kind of be a museum that can also lead that. And like, we're a toy and miniature museum. We're full of joy. We're full of intrigue. But I love how that we too can follow the current state of affairs, and that it is important. And so I see going forward, we will continue to educate young people, and it's so important because you can share history with them, and you can share memory. I also thought about the population that's retiring, because memory is so important, and we at the museum can instill that memory, can poke at that memory of the long term, and can really help with some of the memory decline. So I love that idea that we can bring the museum to folks with memory issues. And so young people, older people, but also how to stay in the conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that has become really important to us, believe it or not, as a small of a museum as we are. So I'm just looking forward to grappling with all these problems. And in a way, I have coined myself as a problem solver, and it lands in my lap, and I'm like, God dang it. And then I am like, oh my God, this is amazing. Let's solve this problem. And how do we do it? So I feel like I have a whole new slew of issues, and I feel it's really empowering. And it's enjoyable. You've asked me what I find a joy in, and I think I love solving problems, but creating opportunities through those problems is always where I end up. It creates opportunities. Every single problem that we have, COVID created so many opportunities to pivot, if you will, and that word is becoming kind of a overused pivot to put our programs online, and we revamped our website, and because we needed to. And so and now conversations about racism and anti-racism has allowed us to have really important and hard conversations, and I think those are amazing opportunities. Are they easy? No. Oh my God. But they make me get up every day and look forward to going.
Yeah. Well, so Petra, I have to tell you, we're coming up on the end of time,
Yay.
but I do have one final question for you, and I cannot imagine that you're going to be surprised by this question. And I bet you've probably gotten it before, but I just want to know, so I'm going to ask it anyway. But my question to you is, what was your favorite toy when you were a kid?
When I was growing up. Growing up in communism, it's interesting because I was surrounded by different toys completely, and so communism didn't allow any of the American toys in. But when I have to think, I loved Karel Zeman, who was a Czech filmmaker, and that is, I think, where my kind of animation and production and live action and just the pure awe of travel. And he was inspired always by Julius Verne's stories. And so I just loved watching all of these movies. And, you know, other than that, I grew up in a country that had puppets and marionettes and storytelling. So I had always a puppet. But the one toy that I recall that I loved, and it is funny because it's a Russian doll, and the Russians, invaded Czechoslovakia for 40 years. But my favorite doll was one that I got, and it had blue hair. I already had a
Yeah.
doll with, regular blonde hair, and I loved brushing it and changing clothes. This one had blue hair, and I thought it was the most amazing thing ever.
I love that. Did he or she have a name?
You know what? I don't remember. I just remember blue
Oh
hair. Oh my goodness. After all the travels and moving from a country to another country, you let go of so much that almost none of my private things as a child are with me, that I couldn't bring with me. So it really exists in my memory, and I don't remember what her name was. Oh my goodness.
Well, I think she'll forgive you.
I hope so.
You clearly
Maybe
love
she
her a
rests in
lot,
peace.
so I feel like she'll forgive you. Well, so Petra, thank you so much for taking the time to
Thank
talk
you.
with us today. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know our listeners did as well.
Thank you, Lauren. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. So folks, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to the Startup Hustle podcast. Startup Hustle was sponsored by Fullscale.io, helping you build a software team quickly and affordably. I'm Lauren Conaway, founder and CEO of InnovateHerKC, and we will catch you next time.